on the edge of the vast western desert, just beyond the sprawling metropolis of modern Cairo, lies a creature of stone and silence. It has the body of a lion and the face of a king, a colossal guardian that has watched the sun rise and set for millennia. This silent sentinel has watched civilizations rise and fall, utterly indifferent to the passage of time. It makes you wonder about the vastness of history and our own small place within it. I would love to know where and when you are joining this story from, so feel free to leave a comment with your location and the time of day. And if you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the past, be sure to subscribe so you will be notified when we release new stories. The Great Sphinx of Giza is a monument of staggering proportions, stretching over 73 meters, or about 240 feet, from its paws to its tail. It rises some 20 meters, or 66 feet, into the hazy Egyptian sky, a scale that is difficult to comprehend even when standing before it. But its size is perhaps the least of its mysteries. For 4,500 years, it has offered no definitive answers to the questions whispered in its presence. Who built this magnificent creature? What purpose did it serve? And whose face is it that stares out across the sands with such serene and unwavering authority? It is a relic from the very dawn of monumental architecture, a period known as the Old Kingdom of Egypt, specifically the Fourth Dynasty. Its form is a fusion of the untamed power of the wild and the divine authority of the pharaohs, a combination that was deeply meaningful to its ancient creators. To truly begin our journey, we must first look at this strange and powerful form, the body of the beast and the head of the man, and ask what it was meant to represent, and even what it was originally called. This fusion of animal and human was no whimsical creation. It was a profound statement of power, a calculated piece of royal propaganda written in stone. For the people of the Nile, the lion was the ultimate embodiment of terrestrial might. It was a creature of terrifying strength, the undisputed master of the desert fringes, a symbol of ferocity and unwavering courage. Lions were also deeply connected with the sun, the most powerful force in the Egyptian cosmos. They were often depicted in pairs, back to back, representing yesterday and tomorrow, guarding the path of the sun as it traveled through the night and was reborn at dawn. This solar connection was paramount. The lion was the guardian of the horizon, the very place where the sun god Ra began and ended his daily journey across the sky. The physical form of the Sphinx captures this essence perfectly. Its vast body is recumbent, lying low to the earth in a posture not of sleep, but of serene, watchful readiness. It is a portrait of latent energy, of immense power held in reserve. Its two massive paws, each larger than a family dwelling, stretch out before it, anchoring it to the sacred ground of the necropolis. The long tail is wrapped neatly around the right haunch, a detail of composed, controlled strength. This was the raw, untamed power of the natural world, harnessed and given form. Fused to this formidable leonine body is the head of a man, and not just any man, but a king. This is where the symbolism becomes truly potent. The human head represents intelligence, divine wisdom, and the specific identity of the ruling pharaoh, the mediator between the gods and humanity. The head wears the royal Nemes headdress, a striped cloth covering that draped over the shoulders and was tied in a knot at the back. This was not a crown in the modern sense, but a potent symbol of kingship, worn by pharaohs for nearly 3,000 years. Upon its brow, there once sat another crucial emblem of royalty, the uraeus, a rearing cobra poised to strike. Though now lost to time, archaeological evidence confirms its presence. The cobra was the protector of the king, an embodiment of the goddess Wadjet, said to spit fire at the pharaoh's enemies. The combination was therefore unmistakable and awe-inspiring. It declared that the king was not merely a human ruler. He possessed the intellect and divine mandate of a man, combined with the ferocious, sun-blessed power of the greatest predator in the land. He was a being who transcended both the mortal and the natural worlds, a perfect guardian for a place as sacred as the Giza plateau. But the name by which we know this creature, the Sphinx, is not its own. It is a foreign label, applied more than 2,000 years after its creation, a name that carries with it a different and altogether more sinister mythology. The word comes to us from the ancient Greeks, who began to visit and write about Egypt in the later periods of its history. For them, the magnificent, silent monument on the Giza plateau reminded them of a creature from their own tales, a monster known as the Sphinx. Yet, the Greek Sphinx was a profoundly different being. She was female, a malevolent demon with the body of a lion, the wings of a great bird, and the head and chest of a woman. According to legend, she was sent by the gods to plague the city of Thebes. She would perch on a high rock outside the city walls and pose a riddle to all who tried to pass. What goes on 4 feet in the morning, 2 feet at noon, and 3 feet in the evening? Anyone who failed to answer correctly was mercilessly strangled and devoured. The city lived in terror until the hero Oedipus arrived. When posed the riddle, he answered correctly. Man, who crawls on all fours as a baby, walks on 2 feet as an adult, and uses a walking stick in old age. Defeated and shamed, the Greek Sphinx cast herself from her rock and perished. The very name, Sphinx, is thought to derive from the Greek verb sphingein, which means to squeeze or to strangle, a direct reference to this terrifying method of killing. When Greek travelers, their minds filled with these tales of a cunning and deadly monster, first saw the silent, enigmatic statue at Giza, they applied the only name they knew for such a hybrid creature. The name stuck, and it has shaped our perception of the monument ever since, shrouding it in an aura of riddles and unknowable secrets. But in doing so, it has obscured the original identity of this magnificent guardian. For the first 2 millennia of its existence, no one in Egypt would have called it the Sphinx. Its true name, recorded in inscriptions from the New Kingdom, some 1,500 years after its construction, was Hor-em-Akhet. This name is a key, a direct statement of its original purpose and meaning. It translates as Horus in the horizon. To understand the significance of this, we must understand the 2 central concepts within it: Horus and the horizon. Horus was one of the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon. He was a sky god, most often depicted as a falcon or a man with a falcon's head. He was the son of Osiris, the mythical first king of Egypt, who was murdered by his brother Set. In the epic struggle that followed, Horus avenged his father and claimed his rightful place as the ruler of a unified Egypt. From that moment on, every pharaoh was considered the living embodiment of Horus on earth, his earthly incarnation. The king was not just a king. He was Horus, the divine heir, the protector of order against the forces of chaos. The second part of the name, Akhet, or horizon, was an equally powerful concept. To the ancient Egyptians, the horizon was not just a line where the sky meets the land. It was a mystical, liminal zone, a gateway between worlds. It was the place where the sun was reborn each morning, and where it died each evening before beginning its perilous, nightly journey through the underworld. The hieroglyph for Akhet depicts the sun disk rising between 2 mountains, representing this cosmic portal. The horizon was therefore a place of immense power, a zone of transformation, death, and rebirth. When we combine these 2 concepts, the name Hor-em-Akhet becomes clear. The Sphinx represents the pharaoh as the divine Horus, situated in this powerful place of transformation, the horizon. And its physical location is no accident. The statue is perfectly aligned, its gaze directed due east, precisely where the sun rises on the spring and autumn equinoxes. It stands as an eternal watcher, a guardian of this cosmic gateway, forever witnessing the daily resurrection of the sun. It is placed directly in front of the pyramid of Khafra, forming part of a vast, sacred complex dedicated to the king's own journey from death to rebirth as a god. The Sphinx, as Horus in the horizon, was the divine guardian of the entire Giza necropolis, the eternal protector of the king's soul as it journeyed toward the afterlife, mirroring the sun's own daily cycle of renewal. The Egyptians had other names for sphinx-like statues, often calling them Shesep Ankh, which means living image. This reinforces the idea that these were not inert sculptures, but were believed to be active, potent vessels of divine and royal power. While other temples, such as those at Karnak and Luxor, would later be lined with entire avenues of sphinxes, some with the heads of rams or falcons. The Great Sphinx of Giza was unique. It was the first of its kind on such a colossal scale, and it was singular, a lone guardian whose identity was inextricably linked with the divine landscape it inhabits. Its original name tells a story not of riddles and danger, but of divine kingship, cosmic order, and the promise of eternal life. The Greek label, while now universal, is a historical misinterpretation, a mask that hides the face of Horus in the horizon. But this raises the most personal question of all. If the Sphinx is indeed a living image, a divine portrait of the king, then which king? For centuries, this question hung in the air, as much a riddle as any the Greek monster might have posed. Today, however, a powerful consensus has formed among Egyptologists, built not on a single spectacular discovery, but on a web of compelling circumstantial evidence that points to one man, the fourth dynasty pharaoh, Khafra. Known to the Greeks as Chephren, Khafra was the son of Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, and he reigned over Egypt during the 26th century before the Common Era, a time that represents the absolute zenith of the Old Kingdom's power and architectural ambition. To understand the case for Khafra, one must first understand that the Giza plateau is not a random collection of monuments, but a meticulously planned and unified sacred landscape, a single grand design dedicated to securing the eternal life of the pharaohs. The Sphinx is not an afterthought or an isolated piece. It is a crucial and fully integrated component of Khafra's own funerary complex. The most powerful evidence is geographical, a story told by the very layout of the stones. The Sphinx sits in a deliberate and profound relationship with the second Great Pyramid of Giza, the tomb of Khafra. Just to the southwest of the creature, this pyramid rises majestically, its peak once sheathed in gleaming white limestone. From this pyramid, a long, covered ceremonial road, known as a causeway, runs down the slope of the plateau. This causeway, stretching for nearly 500 meters, or about 1,640 feet, served as the final stage of the king's funeral procession. It was the sacred path that connected Khafra's mortuary temple, situated at the base of his pyramid, with his valley temple, which once stood on the shores of a now vanished inlet of the Nile. The crucial point is that this causeway does not run in a perfectly straight line. It makes a distinct bend, a deliberate change of angle to run directly alongside the southern wall of the enclosure that surrounds the Great Sphinx. This architectural decision inextricably links the Sphinx to Khafra's sacred road. The creature stands guard over this ceremonial path, its gaze aligned with the rising sun, but its physical presence anchored to the complex of the second pyramid. It is not associated with the causeway of Khufu to the north, nor with the pyramid of Menkaure to the south. It belongs, by position and alignment, to Khafra. This geographical link is powerfully reinforced by a geological one. The Great Sphinx, as we shall explore, was not built block by block, but was carved directly from the living limestone bedrock of the plateau. This process of carving created a U-shaped ditch or enclosure around the Sphinx's body, leaving the central mass of rock to be shaped into the leonine form. This excavation produced an enormous quantity of high-quality limestone blocks, millions of cubic feet of stone that had to be removed. The ancient builders were masters of efficiency, and they wasted nothing. These very blocks, quarried from the immediate vicinity of the Sphinx, became the building materials for the two temples that stand directly in front of it. One is the Sphinx Temple, and the other is Khafra's own Valley Temple, the terminus of his causeway. The stone of the temples is the stone from the Sphinx's enclosure. This is an undeniable geological fingerprint, proving that the Sphinx and these temples were created at the same time and as part of the same colossal project. The architectural style of these temples is classic 4th Dynasty, exhibiting the same monolithic, minimalist grandeur seen in Khafra's other constructions. They are built with massive core blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, or about 110 US tons, and were once cased in polished red granite brought all the way from Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. The Valley Temple, in particular, is a masterpiece of Old Kingdom architecture, and it was here that another key piece of evidence was unearthed. In the mid-19th century, the French archaeologist Auguste Mariette was excavating the Valley Temple, clearing away centuries of accumulated sand and debris. Inside, buried in a pit in the floor, he found one of the most magnificent statues ever discovered in Egypt. It was a life-sized, seated figure of Khafra, carved from a single block of a dark, incredibly hard stone called diorite. The statue is a portrait of supreme, divine confidence. The pharaoh sits enthroned, his body radiating athletic power, his face a mask of serene, eternal calm. Behind his head, the falcon god Horus spreads his wings in a gesture of divine protection, embracing the king. This statue, now a centerpiece of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, provides us with a known, confirmed portrait of Khafra, sculpted by his royal artisans. When one compares the face of this diorite masterpiece to the vast, weather-beaten face of the Sphinx, the resemblance is striking. Although millennia of wind and sand have softened its features, the Sphinx retains the same essential facial structure. It has the same broad, square jawline, high cheekbones, and powerful brow. The planes of the face are wide and relatively flat, a stylistic hallmark of the era. The mouth is wide, with full lips set in a similar expression of divine detachment. The eyes, though now empty sockets, are set at the same distance and angle. While some have tried to use modern forensic techniques to prove or disprove the match, the erosion makes absolute certainty impossible. Yet, to the eye of an art historian, the stylistic signature is clear. The Sphinx's face is not a generic representation. It is a royal portrait created in the specific artistic style of the Fourth Dynasty, a style exemplified by the confirmed statues of Khafra. Finally, there is a whisper of confirmation from the ancient Egyptians themselves, a message left more than 1,000 years after the Sphinx was created. Between the creature's giant paws stands a large granite slab known as the Dream Stele. It was erected by the pharaoh Thutmose IV around 1400 before the Common Era. The stele tells the story of how, as a young prince, Thutmose fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx's head, which was then all that was visible above the sand. In a dream, the great statue spoke to him, identifying itself as Hor-em-Akhet and promising him the throne of Egypt if he would clear away the sand that was choking its body. Thutmose fulfilled his promise, and the stele commemorates this act of piety. Critically, one line of text on the stele, though damaged, refers to the Giza necropolis as a place sacred to Kaf. While the surrounding context is broken, the inclusion of the first syllable of Khafra's name on a monument dedicated to the Sphinx itself provides a powerful link, an echo of an ancient memory connecting this specific king to this specific monument. Taken together, these strands of evidence, the precise geographical alignment with Khafra's causeway, the geological link between the enclosure and the temples, the strong artistic resemblance to his known statues, and the ancient inscription on the Dream Stele weave a powerful and convincing narrative. The Great Sphinx is not an anonymous guardian. It is a portrait in stone, the face of Khafra, forever immortalized as Horus in the horizon, the divine protector of his own eternal journey into the afterlife. This divine protector, this Horus in the horizon, was not assembled piece by piece like the great pyramids it guards. It was born directly from the sacred ground of the Giza plateau itself. The Great Sphinx is the world's largest monolithic statue, a singular, continuous object sculpted from a single mass of rock. Its creation was not an act of construction, but an act of subtraction, of revealing a form that lay dormant within the stone. This fundamental fact represents an engineering and artistic feat perhaps even more audacious than the building of the pyramids. The story of its making begins not with a blueprint, but with a feature of the landscape. Long before the Fourth Dynasty, the forces of wind and sand had already been at work on the Giza plateau, sculpting the limestone bedrock into a series of low hills and ridges. One of these was a natural, elongated outcrop, what geologists call a yardang, which stood out from its surroundings. It was this ready-made mass of stone that the royal architects of Khafra recognized as an opportunity, a chance to create something unprecedented. They envisioned transforming this natural feature of the earth into a divine image of their king. The entire Giza plateau is composed of a sedimentary rock known as the Mokattam Formation limestone, laid down some 50 million years ago when this entire area was a shallow tropical sea. Crucially, this limestone is not uniform. It is a geological layer cake, and the specific characteristics of each layer would profoundly influence both the creation of the Sphinx and its long battle against the elements. The builders were expert geologists, and they understood the rock they were working with intimately. The topmost layer, from which the noble head and neck were carved, is a hard, dense, gray limestone. It is the most durable of the strata, capable of holding fine detail and resisting erosion. This is why, despite millennia of exposure, the face of the Sphinx, though damaged, remains the most well-preserved part of the monument. Beneath this superior stone lies a much larger, softer, and more problematic layer. This middle section, which forms the bulk of the lion's body, is made of a poor-quality limestone, interspersed with bands of even softer clays and shales. It is crumbly, porous, and shot through with natural fissures and faults. The ancient sculptors would have known from the moment they began carving that this rock was structurally weak. Finally, the lowest layer, from which the base and the great paws were formed, is again a harder, more durable limestone, similar to that of the head, providing a solid foundation for the colossal statue. The first step in this monumental undertaking was not to carve the Sphinx itself, but to liberate it. An army of workers, numbering in the thousands, descended upon the chosen outcrop. Their task was to dig a massive, U-shaped trench or ditch around the central mass of rock. This was a quarrying operation on an epic scale. They were not merely digging a hole, they were systematically extracting enormous, regular blocks of limestone. These were the very blocks, as we have seen, that were then used to construct the walls of the Sphinx Temple and Khafra's Valley Temple. The enclosure floor around the Sphinx still bears the scars of this ancient labor, with clear marks showing where the great blocks were cut away. The tools they used were deceptively simple, yet brutally effective. For the initial quarrying and rough shaping, they likely used heavy stone pounders, large, rounded mauls made of dolerite, a stone much harder than limestone. Swung with force, these could pulverize the rock and rough out the basic shape. For the finer work, the artisans used copper chisels and wooden mallets. Copper is a relatively soft metal, but when hardened by hammering, it could cut the limestone, though the chisels would need to be constantly resharpened by teams of smiths working nearby. To split larger sections of rock along natural bedding planes, they may have employed an ingenious technique using wood and water. They would cut a series of small holes, hammer in dried wooden wedges, and then soak the wedges with water. As the wood absorbed the water and expanded, it would exert immense, slow-acting pressure, cracking the stone with surprising precision. The workforce that accomplished this was not, as popular myth so often suggests, a vast legion of slaves. Archaeological discoveries, including the remains of a sprawling workers' village just south of the Giza plateau, have revealed a different story. These were skilled Egyptian craftsmen and agricultural laborers. It is believed that many were farmers who, during the annual season of the Nile's inundation, when their fields were underwater, would pay their taxes to the pharaoh through a system of national service known as the corvée. They were organized into efficient crews, housed in permanent barracks, and fed with the best of the land's produce. The skeletons found in their cemeteries show that they ate well, plenty of meat, bread, and beer, and had access to medical care, with evidence of successfully healed bones and even amputations. This was a respected profession, and their work was a matter of national pride and religious devotion, a way of serving their God King and ensuring the cosmic order, or Ma'at. With the enclosure quarried and the central block isolated, the true artistry began. The master sculptors would have worked from the top down, a logical necessity to avoid damaging completed work below. They started with the head, using the best quality stone to carve the detailed portrait of Khafra, complete with the royal Nemes headdress and the uraeus cobra on his brow. Scaffolding, made from wood and rope, would have surrounded the rock, allowing hundreds of men to work on the surface simultaneously. As they worked their way down, they encountered the poor quality limestone of the body. Here, they faced immense challenges. The rock was so soft and fissured that large chunks of it likely broke away during the carving process. The builders had to improvise, patching and repairing their own work as they went. They used huge, rough-hewn limestone blocks, some of which are still visible today, to plug natural faults and repair areas that had crumbled away. These ancient repairs are a testament to the difficult nature of the stone they were forced to work with. They shaped the vast, recumbent body, the powerful shoulders, the outstretched paws, and the long tail wrapping around the flank, creating a seamless fusion of man and beast. The final stage was to bring the great statue to life. The Sphinx. We see today a monochrome figure weathered to the color of the surrounding desert, is a pale shadow of its original self. In its heyday, it was a vibrant, multicolored spectacle. Traces of the original pigment have survived in sheltered corners, particularly around one of the ears, allowing archaeologists to reconstruct its appearance. The entire statue was likely covered in a layer of plaster to smooth over the rough, poor quality stone of the body and provide a canvas for the painters. The face and body were painted a bold reddish brown, the traditional color used to depict men in ancient Egyptian art. The magnificent Nemes headdress was painted with alternating vertical stripes of bright yellow and royal blue. The divine ceremonial beard, a later addition that has since broken off, was also painted blue, a color associated with the gods. The eyes would have been inlaid or painted to give the face a piercing, lifelike gaze. Imagine the sight. A colossal god king, more than 20 meters or 66 feet high, dazzlingly colored under the brilliant Egyptian sun, staring with painted eyes toward the eastern horizon. It was not a ruin. It was a living god, a terrifying and awe-inspiring manifestation of royal power, born from the rock to stand guard for eternity. But eternity, as conceived by men, is often no match for the patient, relentless forces of the natural world. For the Great Sphinx, the eternal guardian, the greatest threat was not the collapse of dynasties or the armies of foreign invaders, but the silent, ceaseless advance of the desert itself. The very act of its creation had sealed its fate. By carving the statue down into the bedrock, its creators had placed it in a massive, man-made basin, a U-shaped hollow that acted as a perfect, inescapable trap for the wind-blown sands of the Sahara. For a time, perhaps a few centuries after the reign of Khafra, the monument remained a central part of the sacred Giza necropolis, tended by a dedicated priesthood that performed the necessary rituals and kept the site clear. But the glory of the Old Kingdom was not to last. As the central power of the pharaohs waned and Egypt descended into a period of internal strife and fragmentation, the great monuments of the Fourth Dynasty were gradually abandoned. The Giza plateau, once the vibrant heart of the royal cult, became a silent city of the dead, left to the care of the wind. The fine, pale sand, carried on the hot desert winds known as the Kamsin, began to accumulate in the Sphinx enclosure. It would have started slowly, a gentle drift against the creature's stone paws, but over the decades and centuries, the drifts became dunes. The sand crept up the leonine legs, buried the powerful haunches, and eventually submerged the entire body, until only the royal head and neck remained visible, a solitary, colossal visage rising unnervingly from a sea of golden sand. For more than 1,000 years, this was the state of the Great Sphinx. It was a disembodied head, a mysterious icon whose true form was a forgotten secret, buried beneath the earth. To the people of the Middle Kingdom and the subsequent periods, it was not the guardian of Khafra's pyramid, but a unique and ancient deity in its own right, its body locked in a sandy prison. This image of a head rising from the desert floor became deeply ingrained in the Egyptian consciousness. The world had to wait for Egypt to be reborn. Around 1550, before the Common Era, the nation rose again, forging a new and powerful empire. This period, the New Kingdom, was an age of conquest and unimaginable wealth, the age of legendary pharaohs like Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, and Tutankhamun. The capital had moved south to Thebes, but the area around the ancient city of Memphis near Giza became a vital administrative and military center. The New Kingdom pharaohs looked upon the monuments of their Old Kingdom ancestors with a mixture of reverence and awe. To them, the builders of the pyramids were figures from a semi-mythical golden age, and the monuments they left behind were proof of their divine connection. The Sphinx, in particular, was singled out for veneration. It was no longer seen merely as the image of a long-dead king, but as a manifestation of the sun, God himself, a primeval deity named Hor-em-Akhet, or Horus in the horizon. A cult of the Sphinx flourished, and ordinary Egyptians, as well as royalty, began to make pilgrimages to the site, leaving behind small stone tablets, or stelae, to record their devotion. It was during this era of renewed interest that a young prince found himself seeking shade beneath the statue's great chin. His name was Thutmose, a son of the reigning pharaoh Amenhotep II. He was a vigorous and ambitious young man, but he was not the designated heir to the throne. He had an older brother who stood before him in the line of succession. One day, during the blazing heat of the midday sun, Prince Thutmose was out hunting in the Giza desert, a popular royal pastime that involved everything from gazelle hunting in chariots to practicing archery. Weary from his exertions, he sought refuge in the only shade available on that part of the plateau, the shadow cast by the great head of the Sphinx. There, nestled between the buried stone paws, he fell into a deep sleep. And in that sleep, he had a powerful, life-altering dream. The great statue itself, the magnificent Hor-em-Akhet, stirred to life and spoke to him. The words, which Thutmose would later carve in stone for all to see, were a mixture of a divine complaint and a political promise. The Sphinx spoke of the great pain it felt, with its body oppressed by the sand of the desert upon which it rested. It looked upon Thutmose as a son and declared that it would bestow upon him the kingdom. It made a divine bargain. "The throne of Egypt shall be yours," the god promised, "if you will free me from this sand." Thutmose awoke with a profound sense of purpose. He understood the dream not as a figment of his imagination, but as a direct command from a powerful God, and a clear prophecy of his own destiny. He immediately ordered a monumental effort to excavate the Sphinx. Squadrons of workers were brought to the site to begin the back-breaking task of clearing away the sand that had been accumulating for over a millennium. They had to haul out tens of thousands of tons of sand, likely using simple tools like baskets and sledges. As they dug deeper, the magnificent form of the lion's body was revealed for the first time in centuries, a stunning rediscovery of a lost wonder. The excavation was not only an act of religious piety, but also a public declaration of the prince's ambitions and his special relationship with the gods, true to the prophecy in the dream. When Amenhotep II died, it was Thutmose who ascended to the throne, becoming the pharaoh Thutmose IV. His reign was prosperous and stable, and he never forgot the divine promise that had brought him to power. To commemorate his miraculous rise and to honor his stone patron, Thutmose IV commissioned a monument to be placed directly in front of the Sphinx. Between its newly freed paws, he erected a massive, upright slab of red granite, more than 3.5 meters, or about 12 feet, tall. We know it today as the Dream Stele. On it, he had his scribes carve the story of his dream, his excavation of the statue, and the divine promise that had been fulfilled. The stele was a masterful piece of royal propaganda, forever linking his legitimate rule to the will of the ancient sun god. Thutmose and his successors, including Ramesses the Great, nearly 2 centuries later, did more than just clear the sand. They undertook the first known major restoration projects on the Sphinx, repairing the crumbling, poor-quality stone of the body with new casing blocks. They also constructed a series of massive mud brick walls around the enclosure, a primitive but determined attempt to create a barrier against the encroaching desert. But their efforts, like all that would follow, were ultimately temporary. The desert is patient. After the fall of the New Kingdom, as Egypt's power once again waned, the sand returned. The Sphinx was buried and re-excavated several more times throughout its history, notably by the Romans, who, like the New Kingdom pharaohs, held the monument in great reverence. Yet each time it was cleared, the wind would begin its patient work anew, a timeless cycle of burial and rebirth, a constant struggle between human reverence and the relentless elemental power of the sand. Yet each time it was cleared, the wind would begin its patient work anew, a timeless cycle of burial and rebirth, a constant struggle between human reverence and the relentless elemental power of the sand. But the wounds of the ages have not all been inflicted by the slow, indifferent grind of nature. Some have been the result of sharp, sudden violence, the deliberate work of human hands. Of all the damage the Great Sphinx has sustained, none is more famous, more iconic than its missing nose. This single mutilation has given the monument's serene face a haunting, broken quality, a wound that has launched 1,000 stories and one particularly persistent myth. For more than 2 centuries, the most popular explanation has been a dramatic tale of military vandalism. The story goes that in the year 1798, the French general Napoleon Bonaparte, during his famous Egyptian campaign, ordered his artillery troops to use the Sphinx's face for target practice, callously blasting the nose from the ancient visage with cannon fire. It is a compelling narrative, one that encapsulates the clash of a modern European military with the timeless wonders of the ancient world. But despite its enduring appeal, this story is entirely false. The definitive proof of its falsehood comes not from a military record or a historical text, but from a set of remarkably precise drawings made more than 60 years before Napoleon ever set foot in Egypt. In the year 1737, a Danish naval captain and explorer named Frederick Louis Norden undertook a long and detailed journey up the Nile. Norden was a meticulous observer and a skilled artist, and he documented everything he saw with painstaking accuracy. His sketches of the Egyptian monuments were among the first to be widely circulated in Europe, offering many their first glimpse of these ancient wonders. His drawing of the Great Sphinx, published posthumously in his travelogue in 1755, is clear and unambiguous. The nose is already missing. The illustration depicts the great head rising from the sand, just as it had been for centuries, and the profile is starkly noseless. This single, irrefutable piece of evidence completely exonerates the French general and his troops. The damage was done long before they arrived. The myth likely arose from a combination of factors: the sheer drama of Napoleon's expedition, a general anti-French sentiment among their British rivals, and the simple human desire for a grand explanation for such a conspicuous wound on such a grand monument. The true story of the Sphinx's defacement is less famous, but far more plausible, rooted in the religious tensions of medieval Egypt. The most credible historical account comes from a 15th century Arab historian named Taqi al-Din Ahmad ibn Ali al-Makrizi. Writing in the early 1400s, al-Makrizi was a careful chronicler of the history and topography of Cairo. In his work, he records that the nose was destroyed in the year 1378. The culprit, he writes, was a man named Muhammad Sa'im al-Dar, who he describes as a devout, perhaps fanatical, Sufi Muslim from a nearby monastery. At that time, despite the region being predominantly Muslim, the Sphinx was still the focus of certain local folk rituals. Al-Makrizi notes that peasants from the surrounding villages would make offerings of produce and burn incense before the great statue, praying to it in the belief that it held power over the Nile's inundation and could therefore guarantee a bountiful harvest. To a religious zealot like Sa'im al-Dar, this was an unforgivable act of idolatry, a pagan practice surviving in the heart of a Muslim land. Enraged by this open display of what he considered blasphemy, he took matters into his own hands. In an act of furious piety, he climbed the great statue and, using tools, likely a hammer and chisel, he brutally attacked the face, breaking and disfiguring the nose, which would have been about 1 meter, or just over 3 feet, in width. Al-Makrizi's account concludes with a dramatic flourish. He reports that the local population who depended on the Sphinx for their rituals, were so enraged by the desecration of their idol that they mobbed Sa'im al-Dar and killed him. Shortly after, a great sandstorm descended upon the Giza plateau, which many saw as divine retribution, the land itself protesting the mutilation of its ancient guardian. While the nose was violently torn away, another of the Sphinx's missing features, its magnificent ceremonial beard, was lost through a slower and more natural process of decay. This beard was not an original feature of the monument carved in Khafra's time. It was a later addition, a ghost of its former glory, whose story is one of pious restoration rather than creation. The style of the beard, long, narrow, and plaited into a divine shape with a tight curl at the end, is not characteristic of the Old Kingdom. Instead, it is a classic feature of the New Kingdom, the very era when Thutmose IV had his fateful dream and cleared the sands from the statue. It is almost certain that it was Thutmose himself, or one of his immediate successors, like Ramesses the Great, who commissioned the beard to be added. This was an act of veneration, an effort to update the image of the ancient god Hor-em-Akhet to conform to the artistic and religious standards of their own time, making the statue look more like the contemporary depictions of the gods. Unlike the head and body, this beard was not part of the monolithic bedrock. It was constructed from several pieces of limestone, which were then attached to the chin of the Sphinx using a system of dowels and mortar. It was, in essence, a divine accessory. But this method of attachment created a point of weakness. Over the centuries, the expansion and contraction of the stone, due to the desert's extreme temperature shifts, combined with the erosive power of the wind and the sheer weight of the beard itself, would have weakened the joints. At some unknown point in its history, the beard simply broke off and fell into the sand below. There was no single act of destruction. It was a victim of gravity and time. For centuries, its very existence was forgotten. Then, in the year 1817, a Genoese explorer named Giovanni Battista Caviglia was conducting the first major modern excavation around the base of the Sphinx. As his workers cleared away the sand from between the paws, right where the dream stele stands, they found the shattered remains of the beard. These fragments became known as the Beard of the Sphinx. Caviglia, working for his British patrons, sent the largest and most recognizable piece to the British Museum in London, where it remains to this day. A massive, braided chunk of limestone displayed far from the chin it once adorned. Other, smaller fragments were taken to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The absence of the beard, therefore, tells a different story from the absence of the nose. One is a tale of medieval iconoclasm, a violent act driven by religious fervor. The other is a tale of New Kingdom piety and the inevitable, slow decay of an added adornment. Together, these wounds tell a story of the Sphinx's long and complex life after its creation, a history of human interaction that has ranged from worship and restoration to outright desecration, forever altering the serene face that first stared out across the Giza plateau more than 4.5 millennia ago. That serene face has indeed stared out across the Giza plateau for what is almost universally accepted to be more than 4.5 millennia. The entire weight of archaeological evidence, from the layout of the temples to the style of the portraiture, anchors the Great Sphinx firmly in the 25th century before the Common Era, a monument to the pharaoh Khafra. Yet this cornerstone of Egyptology has, in recent decades, been challenged by a radical and highly controversial theory, one that seeks to rewrite the very timeline of human civilization. This challenge comes not from a new inscription or a rediscovered tomb, but from the stone itself. It poses a startling question. What if the deepest, most extensive damage to the Sphinx was caused not by wind, sand, or human malice, but by an element that has long since vanished from this hyper-arid landscape: torrential, unrelenting rain. This is the water erosion hypothesis, a fringe scientific theory that suggests the Sphinx is thousands of years older than its accepted age, a relic from a lost chapter of human history. The idea first gained significant public attention in the late 20th century through the work of an independent researcher named John Anthony West. West was fascinated by the esoteric and alternative interpretations of ancient Egypt, and he became convinced that the Sphinx was far older than mainstream scholars believed. He argued that the weathering patterns on the statue were fundamentally different from those on other monuments at Giza. To West's eye, the erosion looked less like the work of wind and sand, and more like the result of prolonged exposure to flowing water. But West was not a geologist. He needed scientific validation for his theory. In the year 1990, he enlisted the help of Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist and associate professor of natural sciences from Boston University. Schoch was initially skeptical, fully expecting to debunk West's claims and reaffirm the conventional dating. However, after his first visit to the Giza plateau, a close, hands-on examination of the rock surfaces led him to a conclusion that would ignite a firestorm of controversy. Schoch announced that, in his professional geological opinion, the Sphinx and the walls of its enclosure had indeed been weathered by precipitation, by rainfall, for a very long time. The core of Schoch's argument lies in the specific profile of the erosion. When wind carrying sand is the primary erosive agent in a desert environment, it tends to cut horizontally, creating sharp, angular features and undercutting softer layers of rock more than harder ones. The pyramids and many of the tombs on the Giza plateau, which are undisputedly from the Old Kingdom, clearly exhibit this type of wind-based weathering. The erosion on the body of the Sphinx, and most critically on the walls of the enclosure from which it was carved, looks profoundly different. Here, the rock profile is characterized by deep, vertical fissures and rounded, undulating, or scalloped surfaces. This, Schoch argued, is a classic textbook example of erosion caused by heavy rainfall runoff. Water, streaming down the rock faces for centuries or millennia, would carve just such vertical channels and create these softened, rolling profiles. The problem with this observation is that the Giza plateau has been a desert, much as it is today, for the entire period since Khafra's reign. There has simply not been enough rainfall in the last 4,500 years to create such extensive water weathering features. To find a climate in this region of North Africa wet enough to inflict this kind of damage, one has to go back much, much further in time. Schoch pointed to a period known as the African Humid Period, a time when the Sahara was not a desert, but a green, temperate savanna dotted with lakes and rivers. This period ended, and arid conditions began to set in, sometime between the 5th and 3rd millennia before the Common Era. For the Sphinx to have been weathered by rain, Schoch concluded, it must have been carved before this climate shift. He initially proposed a date somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 before the Common Era, a figure that would make the Sphinx more than twice as old as conventionally believed, predating the pharaohs and the entire Egyptian civilization as we know it. This conclusion is, to put it mildly, revolutionary. If true, it would mean that a highly sophisticated, unknown culture, capable of organizing the labor and possessing the technical skill to create a monolithic statue on such a colossal scale, existed in the Nile Valley during the Neolithic period. It would force a complete reevaluation of the origins of civilization. Mainstream Egyptologists and archaeologists reacted with swift and near-universal rejection. Their counter-arguments are as powerful as the water erosion hypothesis is provocative. Firstly, they point to the geology of the Sphinx itself. The limestone of the body is notoriously poor and structurally weak, full of natural fissures. They argue that this inherent weakness, combined with other weathering processes, could create the unusual patterns without the need for ancient rainstorms. One such process is haloclasty, or salt weathering. The porous limestone can draw up moisture from the ground, which then evaporates on the surface, leaving behind salt crystals. As these crystals grow, they exert pressure on the rock, flaking it away in a manner that some geologists argue could mimic precipitation runoff. Other scholars have suggested that the regular heavy morning dew that condenses on the cool rock, combined with the occasional flash flood, could be responsible. The most formidable objection, however, is archaeological. While the geological debate over erosion patterns can be complex and technical, the archaeological evidence is stark. There is, quite simply, a complete absence of supporting evidence for any advanced civilization existing in Egypt in, for example, the 6th millennium before the Common Era. The archaeological record for that period shows small, semi-nomadic cattle-herding cultures, peoples who were just beginning to experiment with pottery and agriculture. There is no trace of the kind of societal organization, monumental building technology, or artistic tradition that would be required to create the Great Sphinx. Furthermore, the powerful and direct archaeological links connecting the Sphinx to Khafre's complex cannot be easily dismissed. The causeway's alignment, the style of the temples, and the fact that the Sphinx and its temples were built from the very same stone quarrying operation all create a cohesive and compelling picture of a single, unified 4th dynasty construction project. Proponents of the older date are forced to argue that Khafre did not create the Sphinx, but merely discovered it, already ancient and eroded in his time, and that he then repaired it and built his temples around it. While not impossible, it is an argument from silence, lacking any direct proof. The debate thus remains a deep schism between two different ways of reading the evidence. Geologists like Robert Schoch see a story written in the weathering of the rock that contradicts the accepted history. Archaeologists and Egyptologists see a story written in causeways, temples, and thousands of other artifacts that tells a consistent tale, one in which a much older Sphinx has no logical place. The scientific consensus remains firmly with the conventional dating, but the riddle of the water has added a new and profound layer of mystery to the silent guardian, a controversy that keeps its true origins, at least in the minds of some, tantalizingly out of reach. While the riddle of the water keeps its true origins tantalizingly out of reach for some, the Sphinx's more recent history is a story of rediscovery and a desperate, ongoing battle against the ravages of the modern world. For most of the last 2 millennia, the creature slumbered beneath the sand, its body protected by a thick blanket of desert. Its full form was only intermittently revealed by ambitious rulers like Thutmose IV or the Roman emperors. The final, and to date permanent, re-emergence of the Great Sphinx began in the early 19th century. Following the initial work of Giovanni Battista Caviglia, who discovered the dream stele and the fragments of the beard, a series of excavators took on the Herculean task of clearing the enclosure. But it was not until the 20th century that the true scale of the monument was fully and permanently revealed. Between the years 1925 and 1936, the French engineer and archaeologist Émile Barrès, working for the Egyptian Antiquities Service, undertook a massive and systematic excavation. Barrès and his teams of hundreds of workers finally removed the last of the accumulated sand, clearing the entire enclosure down to the original bedrock floor for the first time in well over 1,000 years. For the first time, the modern world could see the Sphinx in its entirety, exactly as its ancient creators had intended. A colossal lion recumbent in its stone lair. This final uncovering, however, was a double-edged sword. While it allowed for unprecedented study and appreciation of the monument, it also exposed the fragile, poor-quality limestone of the body to a host of new and aggressive environmental threats. The protective embrace of the sand was gone, and the ancient stone was now fully vulnerable. The 20th century brought dangers the Old Kingdom builders could never have conceived. The rapid, sprawling growth of modern Cairo and the nearby village of Nazlet el Saman brought urban pollution, with atmospheric chemicals and acid rain beginning to eat away at the delicate limestone surface. The intensification of agriculture in the Nile Valley, made possible by the Aswan High Dam, caused the local water table to rise dramatically. This rise in groundwater is perhaps the most insidious threat the Sphinx has ever faced. Moisture from the soil, laden with corrosive salts, is wicked up into the porous stone of the monument through capillary action. As this moisture evaporates at the surface, it leaves behind the salt crystals. This process, known as efflorescence, exerts a relentless pressure from within, causing the outer layers of the limestone to flake, crumble, and detach in a process of decay that is almost impossible to halt. The damage became alarmingly visible. By the mid-20th century, large sections of the creature's chest and paws were visibly disintegrating. In response, a series of major restoration efforts were launched, but these early attempts often did more harm than good. In the 1980s, a project was undertaken using a method that was tragically ill-suited to the monument. The restorers applied a thick coating of cement-based mortar to the damaged areas of the body, creating a hard, rigid shell over the softer, natural limestone. This was a catastrophic mistake. The cement was impermeable, trapping moisture and salts behind it, accelerating the decay of the original stone underneath. Furthermore, the cement and the natural limestone expanded and contracted at different rates in the extreme desert temperatures. This created immense stress, and by 1988, a large chunk of the Sphinx's right shoulder, weighing over 300 kilograms, or nearly 700 pounds, simply fell off, taking some of the original bedrock with it. The incident was a wake-up call, a clear sign that a more scientific and sympathetic approach was desperately needed. The Great Sphinx Restoration Project was launched under the guidance of the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities. International experts were consulted, and a new conservation philosophy was adopted. The flawed, damaging cement was painstakingly removed, and a new, more appropriate mortar based on the traditional mixture of lime and sand used by the ancient Egyptians themselves was applied. This new mortar is sacrificial, meaning it is intentionally softer and more porous than the original limestone. It is designed to absorb the moisture and salts, crumbling away over a period of decades, and thus sparing the ancient stone it is meant to protect. It is a continuous, managed process of decay, a constant cycle of monitoring and replacement that acknowledges the monument's inherent fragility. Alongside this vital conservation work, the modern era of scrutiny has also provided new ways to look at the Sphinx, not just at its surface, but deep within it. Remote sensing technologies have allowed archaeologists to probe the monument and its surroundings without touching a single stone, searching for hidden clues. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys have been used to map the bedrock beneath the statue and its enclosure. These surveys have revealed a number of anomalies and subterranean features. Most notably, they have confirmed the presence of several tunnels and shafts within and beneath the Sphinx. None of these, however, appear to lead to the mythical Hall of Records or a hidden library of Atlantean knowledge, as some esoteric theories have proposed. Most of the tunnels appear to be natural fissures or small, dead-end tombs from a later period. One major shaft, located in the creature's back, was excavated in the 1990s and found to be an intrusive burial shaft from the Saite dynasty, more than 2,000 years after the Sphinx was created. Other surveys have focused on the bedrock in front of the Sphinx's paws, detecting what appears to be a deep anomaly that may correspond to a natural water-filled cavern or a previously unknown chamber, though its exact nature remains unconfirmed without excavation. These modern tools have also allowed us to appreciate the incredible skill of the original builders in a new light. Detailed laser scans of the head have created a precise, three-dimensional digital model, revealing the subtle asymmetries of the face and the remarkable artistry involved in carving such a lifelike portrait on such a monumental scale. This scrutiny has transformed the Sphinx from a simple object of wonder into a complex patient, a priceless and fragile piece of world heritage that requires constant, vigilant care. The battle to preserve it is a never-ending war against salt, water, pollution, and time itself. A testament to our modern commitment to ensuring that this silent guardian will continue its watch for centuries to come. This modern commitment to its physical survival is the latest chapter in a story that has spanned more than 4,500 years. It began as a bold statement of divine kingship, the living image of the pharaoh Khafra, his human intellect fused with the solar power of the lion. It was Hor-em-Akhet, Horus in the horizon, a guardian of the cosmic gateway, not the sinister, riddle-posing monster of the Greeks who lent it its modern name. Born not of assembled blocks, but revealed from a single, massive outcrop of limestone, its creation was an act of geological artistry, a triumph of subtraction that left an indelible mark on the sacred landscape of the Giza plateau. For millennia, it has fought a battle with the desert, repeatedly buried by the shifting sands, only to be reborn through the piety of princes like Thutmose IV and the curiosity of modern explorers. It has endured the wounds of both time and man, losing its divine beard to the slow pull of gravity and its noble nose to the sharp chisel of a 15th century iconoclast. It has become a battleground for ideas, its weathered flanks holding clues that have led some to question the very timeline of civilization. even as the overwhelming weight of evidence anchors it to the age of the pyramid builders. Now fully exposed to our world, it faces new threats from pollution and rising groundwater. Its survival dependent on the constant vigilance of scientists and conservators. And so, the Great Sphinx remains. It is a portrait, a temple, a quarry, a geological specimen, and a symbol of enduring mystery. After all the theories have been debated, all the stones have been analyzed, and all the sand has been cleared away, its fundamental power endures. It is the power of a silent, unwavering gaze that looks out from the remote past, across the turmoil of our present, and toward a future it will surely outlast, forever guarding its secrets in the heart of the Egyptian desert.